everybody, this is Freddy with FreddyCanFly, and in today's video we're going to continue on with the build series for the NiTron. In our previous segment we completed the tail rotor assembly, which you should have here. Double checked, make sure everything is good to go. For right now we can just have that set over to the side. The next step in the manual is going to have us start to assemble the tail boom. This is a pretty interesting part. I've done a lot of helicopter builds, a lot of different ways, a lot of different fashions. And this part at first can be a little frustrating. It can be a little tricky, but I promise a little bit of patience goes a long way. And once you kind of get it down, I promise it, you know, as long as you own your Tron and you ever got to replace a boom or something, you're not going to have an issue. So get out your tail boom, get your tail assembly, go ahead and throw that over to the side if you need to. Just make sure it's available. Your kit, of course, is going to include two different rods. You're going to have the tail push rod, which is the longest one. And then you've got, of course, with this being a nitro, our tail servo is going to sit up on the front end to avoid, you know, the fuel and the exhaust gases and whatnot. So this is your little, your push rod that goes from the servo to the bail arm, and then the bail arm goes from the tail rod down to the tail lever, or what have you. You guys are used to this if you're nitro guys. Okay, so I'm gonna get both of those out, and then you're also gonna want to get, there's a baggie inside that's got this little mounting, I guess you could call it a bracket if you want to, but it's got two little locking nuts placed inside of it, if you can see there. And if you look at we're gonna look at the manual here in a moment. It shows a little bit of a better depiction of it. Okay, and then it's also got the push rod guide here on the bottom with two flathead cap screws. Obviously you guys can see what's going on here. So what we're going to end up doing is you use this is kind of cool, you use your tail push rod and you put it inside this little tool, and then you're basically just going to feed that down. On the bottom of your boom you have these two little holes right there. And, I mean, obviously, guys, connect the dots, right? We're going to try to fasten the push rod support guide into there by using this little tool mechanism that they give us. It's tricky, but we can do it, I promise. I've done it many times. So get that bag out. And then let's also get, so I'm gonna do a little bit of a cheat on this because I'm going to jump forward just ever so slightly, but hang in there, bear with me. I'm going to also, once I'm done with the assembly, I'm going to get out the bag that has the sleeves and the thread inserts for the tail push rod. But if you notice, there's 4 of them in there because instead of waiting till later, I'm going to mix up my epoxy. I might as well do it now. I'm going to do the ends for the tail push rod and then also the tail servo push rod. Might as well get them both done at the same time. When I review the manual here with you in a moment, it's not going to necessarily show that part. For the tail servo push rod, but just know, I mean, come on guys, we've got all the parts out, we might as well just get it out of the way now. So I hate double mixing epoxy sometimes, it just wastes your supply. So that's what we got, that's the project at hand today. Give me a quick moment, let me get everything organized and we will continue on. Okay guys, so before we take a look at the manual, as always I'll go through all the different steps with you guys and we'll look at the overall finished product. I just want to recap and reiterate as I talk about this. Since this step can be a little bit on the finicky side, I'm not going to try to film it in case I make a couple of goofs or drop the tool or something. But for installing the push rod guide into the holes here, of course you're going to want to make sure that you'll notice that they're not straight, right? They kind of angle like this a little bit. So the tool has them also offset, as you can see. So you'll want to make sure that when you install, of course, don't have it. Well, I guess you really can't have it opposing, can you? It's going to fit either way. Just make sure that the exposed threads are facing up. Let's put it that way. And then again, all you'll have to do is you'll pop your little tail link rod in here, and you've got almost like a little lever tool. Now, these do not appear to be nylon locking nuts, so, ooh, excuse me guys, I got the hiccups. So what you're going to want to do is, I'm going to pre-Loctite the little flathead screws first, and I'll make sure, you know, I really rub the Loctite into the threads, just a little amount, you don't need a lot. It is a nitro. It does have higher vibrations, but I can't imagine this part really shimmying loose. So don't go too heavy, but yes, it is metal into metal. So I'll pre-Loctite my screws. These are going to use 1.5 mil hex driver. Okay, so make sure you've got that available. So we're going to do that step first, and then essentially once that's done, guys, we can just install the tail onto the tail boom. I've got a cool little trick on just getting that belt through. It's simple, it's easy. And then we're going to talk about epoxying and getting our ends onto both the tail and the tail servo push rod. So jump over with me to the manual here real fast. And you'll notice as we're looking through here, so here's our step right here that we're kind of going over. So that's pretty straightforward. It does give you a good illustration here of what it is that it wants us to accomplish. Again, you'll basically just feed the rod through. Everything we just talked about is depicted in the illustration, so that should be straightforward at this point in time. One mistake to not make, and I'm going to tell you guys this right now because I've done it, and there was almost no turning back. I almost had to replace my tail. Do not tighten one and then remove the tool and then try to insert the other. Nightmare. Okay, that's a nightmare. Also, if you do not Loctite them and you put them both in and think that you can come back and, you know, take one off, Loctite it, take the one off. No. Okay, so pre-Loctite your screws first, both of them. Have them ready to go. Feed this in. Lock one down, lock the other down. Do not unsnap this tool until they are locked down all the way. Because if you take the tool off prematurely, there's nothing to hold on to those, the shape of the nut, there's nothing to hold on to it to help you tighten it. And you can't fit your fingers down there, you can't fit pliers down there. The only thing you can do is try to fish the block back in there, and trust me, that right there will make you go from a full head of hair to bald in seconds. Okay, so it's kind of a one-shot deal. Feed it in there, lock down both screws completely, and then you just kind of flex the rod down a little bit and the tool snaps off, okay? I can't stress enough to you how frustrating it is to do this. It is kind of an oddball design, but the finished product is something that I like very, very much, okay? So just take your time with this step, be easy. Let's see, moving down. Yep, so right here, it kind of tells you that, you know, tighten your screws, snap the tool off. Keep the tool, though, because if you ever got to replace your boom or something, you always have one handy. Next step that it illustrates, you are going to want a 2-part epoxy. I will show you guys the epoxy that I'm going to use here in just a quick moment. Don't use something cheap, guys. Don't use super glue or Elmer's glue or anything crazy like that. Use a 2-part, you know, at least a 7 to 15 minute cure epoxy. That way you never run into any issues. And I'll show you guys how I do this, but essentially it's going to want at least 13 millimeters of the shaft exposed on the tail rod guide. And then it does have the cap that goes over. I'll kind of talk to you guys about that. Basically, the way you're going to want to do it is I usually epoxy the cap on. I get all the epoxy into the cap. I thread it on. I make a nice little bead right here. And then I'll go ahead and kind of mark off, you know, where my 13 mil is, or at least eyeball it. And then I'll epoxy the hell out of the threads and stuff a bunch of epoxy down the tube. I'll thread it into where it needs. I kind of make a little bit of a bead there. Set it and forget it. It's never going to come off. I mean, it's strong as hell. So I'll kind of demonstrate that for you guys. You have your dimensions here of what the finished product should be. For all intensive purposes, what I do is I just thread, after it hardens, I allow at least 24 hours or so. After the epoxy sets, I'm just going to thread my link rod down basically as far as it can go. I usually leave a couple millimeter gap, and then once I am doing my setup for the tail, that's when I'll make my final adjustments. But if you want to bust out, I don't have something that can measure 646 millimeters, basically, is what I'm trying to say to you. So do that as you want, but there you go. There's your dimensions there. We'll get to that point, and then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and do this portion here. Like we talked about in the previous segment, you have longer bolts on the left outer side, shorter bolts on the inner. So go ahead and bust out your tail fin, Loctite these bad boys down, tail is on. Again, everything's pre-drilled and pre-cut. The thing I love about the Tron tail design is there's no longer that where you have to loosen up the tail and you have to turn it to get it 90 degrees with the helicopter body. It's already pre-drilled in there, so this tail is going to sit flush, or this tail should sit flush, so to speak, with the main shaft at a 90-degree angle. So we're good to go there. Make sure you Loctite those. For feeding the belt through, and I'll show you guys a quick trick for this one here in just a moment too. I just take a piece of dental floss and a toothpick, and we're going to feed the belt through. Really, really simple, really easy to do. Coming down here, this kind of gives you a little bit of the overall setup and what it is that you're looking for. Now, unlike some helicopters, when you get the 90-degree angle, mechanically, right, so a 90 on your tail servo, a 90 on your bell cranks and everything, some machines actually have a dead zero pitch, so they don't have torque pre-comp built into there, essentially. This machine, when you have a 90-degree angle on your mixing arm here, or your push rod arm, you'll notice that you do have a little bit of opposing torque angle on the blades, but your shaft slider should still have equal distance or sliding ability, okay? This kind of threw me off the first time I built like the 5.5. It was kind of odd, but I just went with it, and my tail has some of the best authority on any machine I've ever flown, so absolutely zero complaints with that. And then from there, guys, we're going to be moving on to things like the servo install, clutch bell, and frames, okay? So, real quick, jump back over to the bench with me real fast. And I just wanted to do a quick recap on that. I wanted to show you guys what epoxies I'm going to be using. If you haven't already, just get it out and get it handy, but get yourself out some calipers for the 13 mil that we need on the ends of this. If you need to, just jump in and look up the specs in the manual for this push rod arm. Again, I'm just going to glue my caps on, my threads in, and I do all the adjustments later on, so I don't think it's too big a deal. But I have here it's a 15-minute cure, 2-part mixing epoxy, okay? This is what I use. It has never failed me. I don't use JB Weld, although JB Weld does make a 2-part mixing epoxy if you want to go down that road, but I bought these 2 bottles literally 8 years ago, and I still have this much. It lasts a lifetime. So, I'm going to go ahead and get everything done and get everything assembled, guys. We'll come back and do the final review. Like I said, if you run into any issues with the tail belt, it is really hard to just kind of feed it through without any assistance. So what I do is, again, I just take a piece of dental floss and I just tie it to the end of the belt, and I put a weight of some kind on the other end. I just use a toothpick, and then I'll just drop the toothpick down, and then I use the floss and just pull it right through the boom. So I don't really think that needs a video demonstration, but let me get all this done, guys. I will come back and we will do a final review. Okay, guys, so here we go. We have our finished assembly for the tail. Like we talked about, I went ahead and, I know I didn't show you at the beginning of the video, but I went ahead and got the little tail fin out. Again, this side's got the longer bolts. Make sure, what I did is I Loctited each one gently on this side and then also on this side. And then what I did is just kind of, I tightened this one, tightened that one, this one, that one, and then I gave them the final snug down, just to make sure everything feels nice and square, or fits nice and square, I guess I should say. And again, I'm always continuously checking. Everything feels great. This tail, you can feel how solid it is. It's got a good quality to it. I went ahead and checked downrange. Everything looks to be, flush and 90, if you will, so I'm not worried about that. The belt, again, I just threaded it through, and you can see that you've got quite a bit of belt length coming out here. This boom goes quite a ways into the actual frame, so it's got a lot of really good support up top, hence the fact that we don't need the actual boom supports anymore, and they have that, teardrop design going on the boom. But so I just what I kind of do with my belt is I'll pull it kind of snug, and I just kind of tuck the end in like this. We're not going to need it immediately but we will at some point. But if you kind of pull and loop it like that, boom, it'll just kind of sit there and hang out. That way you don't risk damaging your belt. And then we've got our bottom bracket piece here installed, as you can see. Now it's kind of cool the way, so once you get your push rod all set up, which we'll go over that in just a quick moment, when you want to install it, you literally just set it lengthwise, boom, and then you kind of turn it, and it just locks right into place. Isn't that cool? I don't know, I think that's kind of a cool gimmick. It's kind of fun for me anyways. I mean, yes, you could thread it all the way through this way, but then you'd have to glue your ends on with it in here. Whereas I like to, you know, think that once you have your ends all epoxied on and stuff, boom, you just take the rod, turn it, there you go, there you have it. So, kind of a cool tip there. Okay, so that's all done, that's all good to go. We can set that off to the side. I wanted to talk to you guys real quick about this. I'm not going to do this on camera because, again, it just takes too much time. But I'm going to get my epoxy mixed up. And I want to show you guys how I'm going to do my ends, just in case you're curious or if I get questions about it. So I'm going to get the epoxy mixed up. I'm going to get something like a toothpick or just a really nice small piece of metal, whatever I want to use. Actually, you could even just use this, to be fair. So the cap that you have does have threads on it, right? So this actually threads in to the cap, right? It doesn't just like slide in there. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up the epoxy, and I'm going to try to stuff as much epoxy down into the guide rod as I can. Again, I could use this, scoop some up, and just kind of jimmy it in there as much as I can, right? You can see that fits perfect. So you can use this if you want. And then I'm going to go ahead and line the inside of the cap with epoxy. And what I kind of do is just a little bit of like a teeter-totter, twisty, twisty in and out motion, kind of like this, just to try to get the epoxy as saturated on there as possible. And then what I'll notice usually happens is right at the very end, once the epoxy squeegees out, it makes a nice little bevel there. And then I just take my finger and I just spin the rod around, and it just makes a really nice cleanup. I like it to look nice, guys. You know, I'm not trying to go for anything that's sloppy looking. Let's get you a little bit of a zoom here. Okay, so it'll leave a bevel there. And then, while that epoxy's sitting there, and remember, we filled the inner tube with as much epoxy as we could. Okay, I'll go ahead and take this, get some epoxy into my threads, taking into consideration direction. You'll see there's like a beveled side, and then there's also a side where you could almost stick a tool in. Or no, you can't. So there's a shiny side and a non-shiny side, we'll put it that way. Okay, you want the shiny side to go in. But I'll get a bunch of epoxy on there, and then what I'll do is I'll just hold on to this, and then I'll just start threading this in. Thread it, thread it, thread it. Once we get to our 13 millimeters of exposed shaft, you know, again, as per the manual. Oh, I went way in on mine. So it should be right around, about right there or so. So you'll have about that much. And then I'll just of course I'm going to run over and do the other side. Let the epoxy sit for 24 hours at least before you try to twist on your link rods. They're all clockwise threading, so there's no counterclockwise things going on into play here like you do, like you have with the main turnbuckles. But just make sure you guys do a really good job epoxying these. The only thing that sucks the most about some of these heli designs is if you don't do it right and you're out flying and you pull this part, so bye-bye to your tail. You best have some auto rotation skills. Okay, so I'm going to get that done for both the tail push rod. I'm going to leave 13 millimeters of exposed thread. The manual does not, at this time, from what I could see, specify for this rod. It doesn't specify how much to leave exposed. It just gives you an overall dimension from plastic to plastic. I think it was like 280 something millimeter. I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to leave 13 millimeters of exposed end on each side, epoxy them, cap them, and then during the rest of the build, if for any reason this part is too short or too long, then I can always correct it and revisit it. But I'm going to do the same to this that I do to this. I'm not going to film that, so again, we'll just go ahead and continue on to the next segment. On the next video, we're going to get into some of the framework. So just to recap, guys, we've got the main rotor done. Linkage arms all made up per the manual. Tail is done. It is now installed. And we're going to have our tail linkage rod and our tail servo push rods all epoxied. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. As always, feel free to comment and or subscribe. Follow me on the next video, guys. Remember, if Freddy can fly, so can you.